All right, hey, it's Joel from The Hack Life, and I'm here with James Altucher. James is an entrepreneur, an active angel investor, a writer, a podcaster, stand-up comedian, and a chess master. He's also started and ran more than 20 companies and invested in over 30. He's the author of 18 books, including the bestsellers Power of No and Choose Yourself, and soon to be the next bestseller, Skip the Line. James, welcome to the show, man.
From your mouth to God's ears.
You know, it's funny, just real quick on the intro, my wife goes, "So who are you interviewing today?" I go, "I'm interviewing James Altucher." She goes like, "Who's that?" I'm like, I don't
Good
even know how
question.
to. I'm like, how do I explain him? Like, he's an author. He does this. He does that. I'm like, I don't. Where do I begin? And just real quick before we get into talking about your new book, Skip the Line. Something that maybe a lot of people don't know about you is you have a. I've been following you since probably like 2015, 2016. And I'm also enrolled in a lot of your programs. So you have like these financial programs for like stocks. And back in 2017, you were one of the first people I learned about and trusted when you were talking about cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. So thank you very much. I started investing back then, and we see, I think today it's like 53,000. But you've
Yeah,
got a
it's
lot of
been
great
such an
programs.
incredible journey with Bitcoin. I don't even know what to say about that.
Yeah, and you've got just a lot of great programs that I don't even know if people are aware of, just from like financial stuff and your self-publishing course, just a lot of great stuff. And so I just want to acknowledge you for that and point people, you're not, just an author in a sense. There's a lot of other things you've done. And one of the big ideas also that you put me on was some of the ideas I got from you that really changed the way I thought about things was like, you don't need to buy a house. 401ks are bullshit. I mean, these are ideas that like I'd never heard anybody say, and so I just want to thank you and point people to your direction because there's just things I've never heard anybody else say.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, and I really appreciate that, and I really appreciate you kind of following, what I've been up to all along. Um, it's interesting because let's say I didn't write those things. Those are things I didn't write them to be controversial. Those are things I really believed in through unfortunate trial and error. Like there's been a lot of experiences that kind of define those, and you know, if you don't write something that is going to make people think, what's the point of writing? Is the issue. So like so many people write these articles like, oh, 10 ways to be a better leader. I could read that article a billion times a day. Like it's all that's ever posted on some of the main channels out there, and sometimes that's boring. Like you have to be willing to say things that are a little bit interesting and controversial, and otherwise, why write if you're just going to write something that everyone else is writing?
Yeah, 100%, man. Um, I want to get into, you had an amazing book back in what, 2013, called Choose Yourself. And when you wrote that book, it was all about like choosing yourself in this, what you kind of called like, it would be funny to say, but like back then you had the idea of like, we're moving into this new world where there's going to be AI taking over. Things are going to be changing with the economy, the government, the college, all these things. And so you were arguing back then, you need to choose yourself. Now you've come out with a new book called Skip the Line, which kind of addresses a lot of the same issues. What for you was different about Skip the Line than Choose Yourself, or what made you
That's
want
such
to
a
write
great
this?
question because I had to think a lot about this. What am I going to say that's different and unique? And I don't want to just repeat Choose Yourself. So Choose Yourself was mostly about, it had two main ideas. One is, like many people, when you find success and failure, lots of things happen. And I had gone broke several times, and life's not always easy. And uh, I wrote about how I bounced back. I wrote about how uh, the other concept is, in society, there's all these gatekeepers. So if you want to, as a classic example, if you want to publish a book, you have to get an agent. Then you have to get a publishing company to like you. You have to get an editor to want to edit your book. You have to get bookstores to carry your book. So there's all these gatekeepers that decide if your book is a success or not. But you can also choose yourself. You could say, I'm going to write a book and upload it to Amazon and self-publish it. And there used to be a stigma around self-publishing, but now there isn't, because many self-published books, many books that were originally self-published became massive successes. So The Martian by Andy Weir was originally self-published. 50 Shades of Grey by E.L. James was originally self-published. So there's a lot of books out, like self-published books actually sell more copies on Amazon than regular published books. I don't think many people know that. So
Wow.
in every industry, the gatekeepers are going away. And you could say, well, what about legal? What about medical? Well, there's LegalZoom, which kind of got rid of the gatekeepers on a lot of legal work. So if I'm starting a business and I need a lawyer, instead of spending $30,000 for, basic corporation agreements, and I'm exaggerating a little bit, but some businesses, they will charge you that.
Yeah.
You could do it for $10 or $100, whatever. And so in general, I could choose myself to start a business. I could choose myself to write a book or make a movie. Obviously, YouTube, there's a million people that get more views than on every YouTube clip than all the best TV shows combined.
Yeah.
So, it's a whole new world. And the concept is that anything you want to do, you can choose yourself to do it. Like, trying to think of some. Sarah Blakely is a great example. She had never made a piece of clothing in her life, and now she's the founder of Spanx, which is basically an underwear company.
Yeah.
And she's a billionaire from it. And she was selling fax machines door to door when she came up with the idea for Spanx. She knew nothing about how to design clothes, how to manufacture them, how to sell them, but she chose herself. She gave herself permission to do it. So that's where Choose Yourself goes and explains why this is happening in society, and it also explains what are the basic things. Everybody suffers, everybody goes through some failures. What are the basic things you have to keep in mind, and what are some stories where that using these basic ideas you can really start bouncing back and become a success. And that includes choosing yourself in whatever industry. Skip the Line takes it a lot further, because in Choose Yourself, I didn't really give very specific techniques to accomplish the things you need to accomplish when you want to succeed at something. So let's say, you could either be young and like 27 years old and you're trying to find your passion and then you're trying to succeed at it as quickly as possible. Or you could be in your 40s, 50s, even 60s, and you could say, look, I've been an accountant for 30 years and now I want to do something different with my life. Or maybe you were laid off in this economic lockdown and you're not sure what to do next, but you always wanted to be a chef or start a restaurant and you were tired of being a social media manager for Procter & Gamble. So if you want to change careers and passions, which I'm sure you've probably done at points in your life,
Yep.
everyone is going to tell you, James, you can't do that. What are you even thinking of? There are people who went to school for this. You can't do this. There
Yeah.
are people who have 20 years of experience. What makes you think you're just going to go into this field and do it? Maybe do it as a hobby. Maybe, read about it and enjoy. But, you got responsibilities. You got a mortgage to pay or whatever. And I've changed careers completely 5 or 6 times, maybe more. Every single time, people have said to me, and by the way, when I say people, the closer they are to you, the more likely they are to say it.
Yes.
They're going to say, James, you can't do that. You can't. What makes you think you could skip the line? That's such a competitive field. What makes you think anyone's going to go with you when they can go with, this person who won awards doing this? Like, one time I wanted to start a hedge fund. I wanted to be a professional investor and invest other people's money.
And by the way, this is after you lost a ton of money and you were broke, right?
Right. So
Yeah.
so I lost everything
Yeah.
from investing. Like I went from, and it's, I can jokingly say it now, but it was sad then. It was all cash, $15 million in my checking account.
Oh, my
And
God.
no one is going to feel sorry for me because of that. But about a year later, I had $143 left at cash. It wasn't like I was all in one stock and I never cashed out. I had cashed out from selling a company and that I worked really hard on. And then a year or two later, I was dead broke, and I was so depressed. I was miserable, and I had to bounce back. I was really depressed.
Yeah.
But then, let's say you bounce back. You've chosen yourself. You said, okay, I could do it again, which I didn't really believe at first, but I had to convince myself, and I used techniques I describe in Choose Yourself. But let's say now I want to start a hedge fund, for instance. What do you do when, like, so my a friend of mine, I said, hey, what should I do? Maybe I can get a job or something first. And he's like, oh my gosh, James. First, there's a lot of people in this business. And he was like looking at me like he felt sorry for me. Like I could
Yeah.
see it in his eyes. I wasn't an idiot while he was talking to me. And he was like, James, first you got to get an MBA. Then you should probably work for Goldman Sachs, which, they kind of only hire really young people who went to Harvard or whatever. And then maybe you should work for a big hedge fund, but those are hard jobs to get. And then maybe you could raise money from some of the clients at the hedge fund and you could get started. And I'm like, you're talking about a 20-year period. I need to make some money. I was broke and
Yeah.
I didn't have a job. And so I'll describe a little bit, but using the techniques and skip the line, there's two things you have to do. You have to build the skills first. So I had to build the skills to be a good investor, and that's hard because I think I'm a fairly intelligent person, and I sucked at investing when I started doing. I mean, I lost everything,
Yeah.
and so I had to learn the skills, and then you have to learn the field because, like my friend said, just because you're a good investor, nobody might know that. Like if you don't work at Goldman Sachs, the field is there's banks, there's hedge funds, there's high net worth investors, there's third party marketers who help you raise money. You have to be an expert. You have to know more than anybody else about the field you're going into. And that's different from the skills. So that's an important distinction. A lot of self-help books will say, oh, here's how you hack learning so you could meta learn and learn really fast. It's not just about learning skills. You've got to make money. We want to make money at what we love doing. To make money, you have to learn the skills and the field. That's incredibly important. And so I haven't heard any book really talk about that. And so in Skip the Line, and then I'll give some specific examples, I teach or I write about all the stories of all the times, not only I switched careers, but many other people. I have had 800 podcast episodes, so I talk about some of the people there who had skipped the line and how to learn the skills super fast so you could be in the top 1% of whatever it is you're interested in. And I'm not talking about some life hack. These aren't like shortcuts. These are better ways to learn than how we were taught in, I don't know, high school or college or graduate school or whatever, which are usually bullshit ways to learn.
Completely.
And then I give lots of examples, and then I talk about how do you also learn the meta skills you need to succeed in your field. So I have a chapter on persuasion, and again, it's not like, according to this academic paper, when
Right.
you mirror people's actions, they mirror you back. Like I've read all those books. I've tried the techniques. None of them work. Like maybe they work in a research study or something, but they don't work in real life. And so I said, okay, back off a second. What has worked for me in real life? Like what persuasion techniques have actually made me money, like even millions of dollars? And I just write about them and tell the stories. And then, also there's another thing I address in the book. So I guess there's one more thing, which is everyone says, oh, if you want to be an expert golf player, you got to do 10,000 hours. There's the so-called 10,000 hour rule where it takes 10,000 hours to succeed at something and to master something. Well, that rule is total bullshit. Like it's good for things where there's just a lot of repetition and, and then you get feedback and then you repeat and then you get feedback and then you repeat. But there's very few skills that require that kind of work. And also, I don't want to wait 10,000 hours. So again,
That's
I
a
thought
lot of
about
years.
it's like it could be 10 to 20 years. I started doing at first as a hobby, but then I became obsessed. I started doing stand-up comedy like 6 or 7 years ago, and every comedian was telling me, James, you can't skip the line, man. You got to pay your dues. Don't think you could just start going on tour and doing all these shows on stage. People work really hard for years and years, man. I've been doing this 25 years. Got to work hard like me. And I'm 25. I'm going to be 75 years old. Like what the heck? So, I had to do these techniques to skip the line, and they worked. I mean, within a few, I sucked at first. Like anything worth doing, you're gonna suck at in the beginning because that's
Yeah.
why it's worth doing. It's hard, and I was touring around the world after a few years. Like I had skipped the line. Like these, I wouldn't have written this book if I didn't feel strongly that these techniques work, and particularly now in this environment where 55 million Americans had to file for unemployment in the past year. This is a time to make changes if you want. If you want to be a chef, if you want to be in the sports business and because you're sick of trading bonds, if you want to be, a rocket scientist because you're sick of, I don't know, being a chemist, whatever you are.
Yeah.
And I've done this so many times, and it's been such a pleasurable thing there's so many, mastery and freedom are two important keys to having really long lasting happiness, to raise your baseline of happiness. And so, it was just a pleasure to do all these activities and then to write about it, and hopefully people learn from it. And I've worked with people and had them told them, showed them some of these techniques. And it's amazing how much people have accomplished that I did my podcast about this for the past year, and it's been a great experience. Sorry, I just went on and on, but that's what the book's about. But the beating the 10,000 hour rule, this is what I wanted to say. Beating the 10,000 hour rule, I developed what I call the 10,000 experiment rule, where it's through experimenting with things that you don't know in your field and maybe nobody knows. That's one of the most important skills for skipping the line, among a few others, but the 10,000 experiment rule. And it's really more like 100 experiments, to be honest.
Yeah.
I just wanted to call it the 10,000 experiment rule to match the 10,000 hour rule. But it's been amazing to experiment on things that I'm interested in. And that's how you immediately learn so much more than everybody else. And you have stories to tell, and you find your unique voice. In order to succeed at something, you need to find some way to be unique in it. And through experimenting and making these experiments, and I describe how to do that, is how it's worked for me.
Yeah, so much to unpack there. I mean, one of the
sorry,
things.
I went on. I did everything.
Oh, that was great. And the interview's over, everybody. And that's it. One of the things you talk about is, running these little micro experiments, which I love. And what you're talking about with the whole becoming a comedian, which is just when you did that, and I was listening to you on the podcast years ago, I'm like, he's crazy. Like, I was like,
everybody
man,
said that.
Like,
oh my God.
I'm like, how is he? I almost just was in my head because you do so much. You write a lot. You do talk about finances. You have your podcast. I'm like, how does he have the capacity to develop this new skill? It was just more of like the capacity to be really good at it. Like, yeah, you can. Oh, I want to try that. Yeah, that's one thing. But you weren't just trying it. Like you were going up and doing it and being good at it, and that's a big difference. And one of the things I've noticed just through your life, your career, is it seems like you've developed all these micro skills, as you call them, and you leverage these micro skills in different ways to maybe start the comedy business. Like when you started comedy, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. Didn't you buy a club and you kind of
No, I am a co-owner of an iconic New York City comedy club, but that was several years in. I was already doing it. I was regularly on stage about 3 or 4 times a week, not only at my club, but all the clubs around the city and clubs around the country. And then this club was right across the street from where I lived, and I was at this club. It was everybody has what's called their home club, the club where they like to try stuff out. And so I knew this club very well. I knew the owners, and when they needed an investment, I said, "Oh, let me invest." And of course, I always said to them, and who knows if they followed this, but I always said, don't book me if you think I'm no good. But I'd already been booked pretty regularly there. But I said, if I'm having a bad series of days, just, I'll back off anyway. And that was really important to me. And I made sure I was always performing at other clubs, so I didn't get too comfortable at the club that I owned.
Yeah, you didn't want to make it feel like they had to put you up because you own the club. Or
right, and it wasn't, and I don't even consider that skipping the line, because To own a comedy club, not everyone's going to do that. It's the worst investment in the world. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. In retrospect, I didn't need to do that at all. I mean, I learned about the comedy business, so it helped me learn about the field a little bit. But it didn't even really help that much. Talking to other comedians and doing other things that I describe helped a lot more.
Yeah, I mean, even taking like the micro skills of, you've been interviewing and running a podcast, so you have all this data just from interviewing all these other great comedians and all these other great people, and it's like you leverage these skills, and then you run these little experiments. And what I
Yeah.
love about the experiments is like, hey, like you frame them in a way where they're like easy to do, they don't cost a lot, and I can test, retest, and I get a lot of feedback really quick. But one of
Yeah,
the
like
keys that you do also is that I have to say is that even from reading the book is, you're somewhat fearless when you don't attach, and I think that gets in our way, a lot of us, but you're just like, well, I'll try it. Let's see what happens.
well, you know what? It's not that I'm fearless because I'm afraid all the time. It's that I actually have fear. But my kind of rule of thumb is if the more you're afraid of something, the more it means you probably should do it. Unless it's something crazy, like I'm saying within reason. Like I'm afraid to jump off the Empire State Building, and
It's
of
probably not
course
a good
I'm
idea.
not going to do
Yeah.
it. But I'll give you two examples from comedy. Um, let's say I'm performing that night, and in New York City, it's usually like 5 or 6 comedians perform, and it's like a lineup. Everyone gets 15 minutes, and let's say they tell me, I don't know, Chris Rock is gonna perform tonight. Do you want to go? And they give me a choice. Do you want to go before him or after him? They give everybody that choice, and usually they give everyone that choice. They might not. 100% of the people say, "Oh, I'm definitely going before Chris Rock," because
Yeah.
if you go after Chris Rock, the whole audience is just they're texting their friends. I just saw Chris Rock, man. It's Chris Rock, and whoever is up next, you almost feel sorry for that person because how's he gonna? Oh, I just saw Chris Rock. Now who's this unknown person who's not as funny, anywhere near as funny as the best comedian in the world?
Yeah.
But I always, 100% of the time, I always say I want to go right after. I want to go right after Tracy Morgan or Bill Burr or whoever it is. And that's one way of skipping the line is like, the thing that's the hardest to do, you should do it. Because first of all, it's not hard in the sense that it requires a lot of time or a lot of money. I just have to perform my regular 15 minutes. I'm just choosing that night to go after, let's say, the best comedian in the world or one of the best comedians. And so, what's the downside? A bunch of tourists from Norway or whatever don't laugh at me, and I get to watch, Tracy Morgan right beforehand. So no matter what, I'm learning and I'm having this experience of what it's like to do comedy after a great comedian. And the upside is I learn this huge amount. Like I take the energy of Tracy Morgan or whoever it is and just bring that into my own set, and I learn that experience. And instead of maybe I'm skipping 300 hours of the 10,000 hour rule that one night by
Right.
doing that. And I have gone up after all these comedians. Like going up after Tracy Morgan is insane because I don't know if you remember who he is. He was on 30 Rock,
Oh
kind of
yeah.
the star, and he's insane. And there was this one comedian who his name's Aaron Berg. He laughs per minute. He's maybe the best comedian I've ever seen, just in terms of laughs per minute. And he specializes in crowd work, meaning he doesn't do tell just normal jokes. He's always interacting with everybody in the crowd. And it's really hard to follow that because the crowd's all hyped up. Like the comedian was just making them laugh and talking to them. It's like he locks up the audience. And then if anyone goes up, if you're not as good as crowd work as him, you're gonna bomb. And he's the best in the world at crowd work.
Yeah.
But they don't want to hear material. They don't want to hear just like random jokes because they just were interacted with, or their adrenaline is pumped up. He was like, I would just follow him around and try to go up after him on every show. It was like solving a Rubik's Cube or something. Like, how do I solve this problem of following this guy who has this unique style of insane crowd work? And it took a while, but then I was able to do it. Nobody else has that skill of following this guy because everybody wanted to go before him because he has a reputation of locking up the crowd like that. And so
Yeah.
that's just a fast way to learn. In terms of, and those are like little experiments. I'm going to experiment going after Tracy Morgan because I'm afraid to do it. But here's another one. When I first started, you start to like when you're hanging out with your friends and you tell a joke, they laugh politely or impolitely or they make fun of you or whatever. But if you tell a bad joke in a comedy club and they don't like you, they're gonna either boo you or even worse, they're gonna be just silent, and you're just gonna be talking to this room of 100 people and there's just dead silence, and you just feel miserable afterwards. So I did an experiment. I went on a subway car, and every stop I switched cars and I did stand up on the subway car. That's a hostile audience of strangers, and your jokes have to be super tight because they won't pay attention to you, and they
Yeah.
already hate you as soon as you start talking. So that was an experiment that again allowed me. That was like maybe worth 50 times bombing because I learned so much that one afternoon. I did it for like a few hours, just jumping from car to car, and that's an example of an experiment. There's no downside. What is my downside there? There's zero. It costs zero money. And I took a video. I had a friend take a video so I could analyze it later. And the upside is that I became much better with hecklers and booers and bombing.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I hardly ever do that now. But I was scared to death. I got on the train, and my friend with the camera got on the train, and I told her, forget it. I'm too scared. I'm not going to do it. This is stupid. And then I said, I'm looking around, and then I said, turn on the camera just in case I start.
Nice.
And as soon as she turned on the camera, I just went at it, and it was great. It was a good experience. And then I turned it into like a little, almost like late night talk show, where I went back later and brought a friend on who had just written a book, and we did like sort of I interviewed him like I was a host on the subway, and we talked to other people in this car about his book. And then there was a drummer in the subway, so I had him as the musical guest. And
Hilarious.
you could leverage these things into experiments, into other experiments, and have fun with it. Another example of an experiment, and I do these all the time, was and you could do them about business. Maybe you're thinking of making a clothing line. And it's like pajamas that are designed as outerwear, and you could just wear. An experiment is, okay, for the next month I'm going to wear pajamas everywhere I go, to restaurants, to public speaking events, to business meetings, on the subway, going out to dinner with my friends, and see how people react. And if they say, oh, can I get one of those, you might have a potential business there. Your downside was you wear super comfortable clothes for a month, and then you go back to wearing your uncomfortable clothes, because pajamas, by definition, are the most comfortable clothes. You could sleep in them. So, those are, I've done, at any given moment, I have many experiments going on. And again, they all should have easy to set up, little downside. You're going to learn something no matter what, and enormous, enormous upside if things work out.
Yeah, you talk about in the book there. You give a great example of this Cornell, or he's some kind of PhD. He has a PhD in physics, but he wants to teach at Cornell computer science. And they said, you can't come teach here. You have no teaching experience. But he had and we don't even know if you really have computer science experience, but you say you do.
I still don't know.
Yeah. But so he's like, okay, well, like you said, got to go back. You got to get a 4-year degree, get some teaching experience. He's like, let me run an experiment and just go teach like on the side, like at night, to these kids at the university, some computer science programming lessons, however long he does it. And then the next thing you know, he's got teaching experience. He goes back and they hire him.
Yeah. Like he just put up a sign in at night, all the classrooms are empty. He put up a sign on the, cork board or whatever, where you could put any announcement you want. And it said, hey, I'm going to be teaching, basic computer science. And then he also taught advanced computer science stuff. I'm going to be teaching at 7 p.m. in this classroom. Show up if you want to learn. And he became so popular. Like, he's a really great teacher, actually. He became so popular. This room would be packed with all the students in the department every night. And the university took notice. And even though they had rejected him for a job earlier, he got hired, got tenure, and is a very successful professor. His students have gone on to win many awards in the industry. He had only done physics before that. So, but he learned enough computer science, and he learned also through teaching. So he had skills as a teacher, but then you learn when you teach. So I talk about, I go, I talk about a technique that I've actually written about before, but I go much more deeply into it. It's called plus minus equals. And it was told me by Frank Shamrock, who was a 10-time MMA champion, really tough guy who had to learn basically every martial art, and you can't spend years learning it. You had to learn them pretty quickly. So plus minus equals is find a plus, someone to teach you, someone who's great to teach you. Find equals, peers that you could bounce ideas off of, and you're all growing together. And then you have to find a minus, someone you could teach, because even Einstein said if you can't explain something simply, then you don't really understand it. So that's one of the techniques in the book. You mentioned micro skills. I just want to mention what that is. Let's say you want to be good at business. There's no such skill as business. There's you have to be yeah. It's a basket of micro skills. So you have to be good at sales, negotiating, coming up with ideas, executing well on those ideas, selling your company, starting your company, managing people, having a vision and being able to express it. Persuasion. Those are all independent skills that you have to get good at to be good at business. But the good thing is, understanding that also helps eliminate, if you think you need 10,000 hours in business, you're wrong. Maybe you need to be really great at sales and pretty good at managing people, but then you could hire programmers to execute, and you could hire other people to do administrative tasks, or hire someone to sell your company when it's time to sell, or hire someone to raise money. So you find, you only need to be good at a few things, combine them together, outsource other things, and then also there's, use experiments to find what's unique about your business and you and what you do. But all these things sort of work together.
Yeah, I mean, it's you used a lot of micro skills too. You talk about you're like, I didn't know how to negotiate, but you started all these businesses. And it's like, to me, you almost didn't need to know that. Sure, it would have been great if you had really known it, but you leveraged so many other skills that you had developed from other jobs and other experiences, and it's like it didn't matter. You still were very successful. It reminds me too, when I was 18, I don't know if you've ever heard of Cutco knives.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so I started selling Cutco knives when I was like my first job. My buddy got me hired, and I always
God damn, I know this guy. He's been on my podcast. What's his name? Giftology. He wrote that book.
Yes, I know who you're talking about. John Runin.
Oh yeah. He's great. I really like that guy. I'm sorry I didn't remember his name as I was flustered.
Yeah,
he's so good. I like his book Giftology.
Yeah, that was a good one.
And he was a Cutco guy.
He was a Cutco guy. And you learn so many. I mean, when I go back in time, I'm 39. I'll be 39 this year. When I go back in time and I think about where I've been, I think about the skills I learned in that job: communication, cold calling people, going to people's homes, just communication, reading people's body language, all these little things. Those skills help me way more than any 9-to-5 job I've ever had.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing where you pick up skills and why and how. But I'm doing. I'm always doing a bunch of experiments. But one of the experiments I'm doing right now is, I wanted to skip the line, all the techniques in the book, to really quickly learn something, just to prove to myself again that there's no BS here. This really works. And you've seen the book. There's 23 chapters. There's a bunch of different techniques that all sort of. It's not like only use one technique. You kind of have to use all of them.
Yeah.
And to really succeed in a field. So after that TV show, The Queen's Gambit, came out, it's in November or something. I had been a good chess player when I was younger. I was a very good player. But when you stop, I hadn't studied the game in 23 years. So I went from being a very good player, I was New Jersey's junior chess champion when I was a kid, and I was a master level chess player. That was my rank at chess. But I knew that I really had lost like a lot, if not all of my ability. Like I would say I was a strong chess player because that was my rank, but strong chess players knew that I wasn't really. And so
Yeah.
I decided I'm going to use my technique. So first thing I did was plus minus equal, got myself a coach and, play with games with my peers. And then I called up the professor who had thrown me out of graduate school in 1991. And I always knew he was interested in chess. And I said, how about I give you lessons? And he's like a dean at Georgia Tech now. And he's like, okay. So every week I give him and his son chess lessons. And, every week I take lessons and every day I play. And then I looked at the micro skills. Well, in chess, there's openings, middle games, end games, tactics. So I set up ways to study each one of these micro skills pretty consistently. And again, nobody really does that. Like they just play and try to get better. And then I wanted to do experiments. So, 30 years ago, 35 years ago, I learned one way to play, which is a very safe, what's called positional way to play. And it starts off with a certain set of moves called an opening that's very conservative. And I'd been playing that all my life since I was a kid. I threw all of that out, and now I play the most insane, crazy openings that are so tricky. And, I went from playing, something called, the King's Indian defense to something called the Halloween Gambit, which is just an insane, crazy opening that makes wild games. So it was a completely different style. It's like I had to relearn the game from the ground up, and
Wow.
on and on. I learned more. I used all the techniques in the book, and here we are. Like it's about 3.5 months, 4 months later. I'm probably now better than I ever was, even at my peak. And at my peak, I was very, very strong.
I love that idea of plus minus, the plus minus.
Equal, yeah.
Equal. Thank you. I was doing jujitsu for a long time, and they never called it that, but that's exactly what it was. You'd go train, and then they would have you open mat where you just would spar against people. You'd start rolling. You would go from a white belt who was your level to someone who just walked in the door, who's someone less than you, and then you'd go take on like a black belt or a brown belt, and they would beat the snot out of you. But you learned so many different, like you said, openings and transitions. Another thing in jiu-jitsu is that might be a class. Like the entire class might be like, I'm gonna mount you, and now you need to escape. So we don't just start from like the normal position. It's like, no, I'm going to put you in a really bad position, and now we're going to go. So you learn all these different, techniques and openings.
Yeah, and by the way, that's a fascinating one too, because in I do the same thing in chess where I'll play something that's specifically bad, and then the entire game I got to dig myself out to win. And so, by the way, what I just said, that this opening, the Halloween Gambit, is specifically bad. Like it is not a good opening, and you for those who know chess, you give up a piece in the opening to maybe get an attack. It's unclear, and the computer instantly thinks you're losing. And
Interesting.
I win game after game with it now because it forced me to think in this completely new, aggressive, attacking style that I had never played in before, and by putting myself in a hard position instead of playing the same things I played for 40 years or 30 years. I learned so much. And so that's how I skipped the line, getting better than I ever was before, even though I'd lost a lot of ability in the past 23 years. So it's, like with starting a hedge fund and learning investing was another thing. Like I experimented, I wrote some software, and it's not as hard as it sounds. There are packages to help you write software. I wrote some software to statistically model the stock market, and I would do experiment after experiment, and use and ask the data and use my software to ask the data what happens. So what happens if Microsoft goes down 5 days in a row? Does it typically go up the sixth day? How often? And I would find, by doing thousands of these experiments, I would find trades that had high probabilities of success, and that really worked. I immediately skipped the line. I didn't even have to know what company I was investing in. Just these statistical techniques worked for many years. I don't know if that strategy works now, but it did then. And every field I've ever been in, you know, I mean, right now I'm doing an experiment. I don't even know what I'm doing it for, but uh, during, this election was a really intense election, of course,
Yeah.
in the United States, and I got so sick of all the arguing, like everyone did. Like everybody
Yep.
was arguing. And, I liked a candidate that wasn't Joe Biden or Donald Trump. Like I liked Andrew Yang, for
Yeah.
instance. And I also liked some things that other people had to say, some third party candidates. And, but people were like, no, 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 you have to vote this way or else you're this. Like, and
Right.
people on both sides were saying this to me. Like, people who wanted Donald Trump were saying, you got to vote for Trump or your taxes are going to go through the roof. A vote for anybody else is a vote for higher taxes. And people who like Biden were saying, if you don't vote for Biden, then you're a racist. And I'm like, well, there's 330 million people in the country. You mean to tell me these are the two best people out of 330 million?
Right.
That these are the choices we have? And everyone was like, it doesn't matter. You got to do it because you got to do it. And I'm like, isn't the point is that we all have a voice and we all have differences and we should discuss those differences? So I'm doing an experiment which is ongoing. I haven't totally written about it yet or anything. But the day after the election, I went to fec.gov, which is the website for the Federal Elections Commission. I filled out all the paperwork. Took me 15 minutes. And I'm saying this because everybody could do this. You should do this.
Yes.
And I'm officially a candidate for president in 2024. Like
This
I'm
is
listed
great.
with the U.S. government as a candidate for president. I forgot what the party was, what I called it. Maybe the Bachelor Party or something. And even though I'm not a bachelor, but anybody can do it. You can run for president. And then if someone says to me, you don't have a right to have a voice because you didn't vote for one of these two candidates, I'll say I have to have a voice. I'm running for president. So and you can too.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be the same. If I'm liberal on some issues, if I'm Democrat on some issues, Republican on other, it doesn't matter because I have my own thing. I have my own voice.
Yes.
And so that's why I encourage everybody. It's a way to learn about the system by participating in it, and that's an experiment.
I love
You
that.
get a little skin in the game.
Yeah, which is also a chapter. It's
Yeah.
it's a sub chapter in your book.
Yeah, well, that's another thing too. And I don't know if Nassim Taleb is going to hate me or not after this comes out, but I wrote a chapter just about him.
Yeah,
and I basically
you
said
did.
you don't have to read any of his books. You just have to read the titles, and I'll explain them to you. And that's all you need to know is the titles and what they mean because they're great titles.
I think it's going to work in his benefit because I've heard you talk about him a lot. I think you had him on your show.
Yeah.
I haven't actually read it. I'm a big reader, but I haven't read those books, so it's actually kind of inspired me to read them. So don't worry, Celeb. It's going to be good.
He's a good writer and he's a good person but I just love his titles so much. The ideas just behind the titles really resonate and are good for skipping the line. They're very good for decision making and decision making and managing risk are key things if you want to skip the line because you can't take if you want to get good at something really fast to be in the top 1%, good enough that you can monetize it super fast, you have to take very calculated risks. You know the rewards are there. And the key to winning the game is staying in the game, whatever industry it is. So if you flame out because you take too much risk, you won't win the game, whether it's business or investing or comedy or writing, whatever. And his books are very good for mitigating risk.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, in terms of you've done very well with your 10,000 experiment rule in your career, but just kind of like your example about being a chess master, you developed this amazing skill, but then you just kind of stopped and then you did some other stuff. Do you ever look back and think, man, it kind of hurt me that I did it? Did you ever feel that way that it might have limited you or hurt you by not staying 10,000 hours just doing chess, for example?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You look at people who do one thing their whole lives. Like comedy, for instance. Dave Chappelle's been doing stand-up comedy since he was 14, and he's in his 40s now. So of course he's one of the best in the world. I mean, he was great to begin with, and he's the best in the world now. And I'm fortunate that the person I tour with when I go on tour is this guy, Tony Woods, who was Dave Chappelle's mentor when Dave was 14. They were both living in the DC area. And Tony would kind of take him around, promise his mom that he'd have Dave back home by midnight or whatever. And I get to watch, Tony in action. So I'm skipping the line because I get to watch Dave Chappelle's mentor, for hours and hours every time we perform together. But I always wonder, like, what if I had started when I was playing chess, for instance, when I was 6 and just stuck with it? Maybe I'd
Yeah.
be truly great. Or what if I had stuck with running a hedge fund? Maybe I would have gotten over the last few hurdles and become a $1 billion hedge fund. Or what if I had just stayed in technology and tech entrepreneurship, which I've been in and out of for 30 years? Maybe I would have. A lot of my friends from back then and were early investors in Uber and made $100 million on that. Maybe I would
Yeah.
have been that. But you can't regret these things. Like, I'm the type of person who has lots of interest, and when I get interested in something,
Yeah,
I
you
get
do.
obsessed. And then this is a key point, actually. It's not that you should do something that you love or that you're obsessed with. The reason why it's good to do something that you're passionate about is all about energy. So if I'm not passionate, if I just said, I'm going to do this skip the line on getting better at chess, even though I have zero interest in chess, it wouldn't work because I would have to then use some of the energy that I'm able to devote to learning. I would have to use some of that energy to convince myself to sit down and study for the day. And if I hate investing, but I really just want to make a lot of money, and this is the way to do it, I would have
Yeah.
to convince myself, okay, I hate this, but I got to do it. That energy is valuable. If you're trying to be the best among the best in the world at something that people work really hard at, you need all the energy you can get. And when you love something, you don't need that extra energy to convince yourself to do it. Particularly, by the way, again, anything worth doing is going to suck for a long time. So with investing, you're going to lose money when you start. You have to love something enough that you could handle the down points. If I lost chess all the time and I didn't love it, I wouldn't stick with it. I would just say, forget this. I'm going to just watch TV all day. At least I enjoy that, and it doesn't suck all the time. So, so that's why it's important to do something you love. And people say, oh, that's BS. You don't always have to do something you love. If you're going to get good, you need to do something that you have some love for because you have to be able to stick with it and not use too much energy.
Yeah. Love that, man. One of the big things in your book that you actually mention and choose yourself, but you even go deeper, I think, and skip the line is which I love, and it's hugely impacted my life, is the idea muscle or the idea machine. And you say like, yeah, I mean, like people, I think we come up with these ideas. I'm not creative. I don't have these ideas. And you say, yeah, no shit. Like you need to like exercise that muscle, the idea muscle. Can you kind of talk about that?
Yeah, I remember thinking about this a long time ago. This friend of mine, um, she was in the same computer science program that I was in, and she was like, "Oh, I really hate this. I really just want to be a painter." And I'm like, "Well, why? Okay, are you painting anything?" And she's like, "No, no, no. I just picture myself like outside the Eiffel Tower and painting on my canvas, and inspiration will hit." And I was thinking to myself, it doesn't really feel that that's what like Van Gogh did. Like it doesn't like that's not how things work really. You have to really exercise your idea muscle, exercise your creativity. Inspiration doesn't just hit unless unless you're unless the receivers are open, unless the satellite is turned on, the antenna is turned on. And so I started writing down 10 ideas a day. I mean, it's a whole story I write about in Choose Yourself. But over time, it like writing 10 ideas a day just like lit up the neurons in my brain. And so it's a lot easier to generate good ideas. It's very hard to generate good ideas. Like if you're
Yeah.
writing 10 ideas a day, that's 3,650 ideas a year. Maybe only a few are good, but it gets you in this rhythm of always being looking for ideas. But then I started realizing there's techniques to have better ideas. And I write about it a little in other books. I write one of the techniques and I call it idea sex, where you take
Yeah.
two
I love
ideas and
this.
combine them. So sushi was a good idea. Burritos are a good idea. Let's make a sushi rito restaurant where I do burrito style food, but with sushi ingredients. And that's idea sex. But I realize there's actually a lot more than idea sex. There's I write about this in the book in a chapter. I called it idea calculus, where there's idea multiplication, idea exponentials, idea subtraction, idea division. And all of these things are techniques I've used to start businesses, write articles, write jokes, skip, choosing myself, skipping the line. Like, okay, instead of needing a publisher, editor, and agent to publish my book, I'm gonna subtract those and figure out how I could write a book. And that's one way to choose yourself. And I didn't think about it until I really started thinking of all the types of ideas that's what I had been doing. So that was a special chapter for me because it adds to something I've talked about so long, but it really defines it even further.
Yeah, you even bring up this you even bring up this topic, Jackie Robinson and talent sex. I was like,
Yeah.
what?
Yeah.
You know,
Well, Jackie
like,
Robinson was a great baseball player, obviously. I mean, one of the best. And he was one of the best baseball players in the Negro Leagues. And Branch Rickey, who was in, Major League Baseball, there had never been a black baseball player. And Branch Rickey, the head of the Brooklyn Dodgers, wanted to be the team who was first. And so he the best player in the Negro Leagues at the time was probably this player, Satchel Paige.
yeah,
But Satchel Paige was a little bit of a rebel. And Branch Rickey, for better or for worse, these were difficult times then. And, water fountains were segregated, restaurants were segregated, hotels were segregated. He wanted to be the first to have a black baseball player in the major leagues, but he was afraid of someone who was going to cause too much trouble every time they traveled to the South and they had to stay in separate hotels and so on. There was nothing you could do about that. You had to wait for the laws to change and for people to be reasonable. And Satchel Paige probably wouldn't have been ideal for that, but Jackie Robinson was, and as a result, became a great civil rights leader ultimately.
yeah, huge. Another big topic that you talk about in the book is this idea called frame control. And you mention, I've heard you mention on the podcast a lot of times, like just how in the last year or so, like the frame, it's called the Power Bible. The author, that's the name of the book.
Yeah.
It's called the Power Bible. And it's had a huge influence in your life. And I remember hearing the interview and I thought, yeah, okay, it sounds good. But you have really touted this up to be something huge. So I was just kind of curious, why is that? Or what were the big aha moments after learning this?
Well, the big aha moment is that these techniques work. So, if you read, there's so many books about persuasion, and again, here's what they say. I mentioned this before. They say, we did this. There was this research report, a scientific study in Georgetown where they put 50 people in cold temperatures and 50 people in hot temperatures, and who was easier to persuade, blah, blah. And so they get all these research papers, even Robert Cialdini's classic book, Influence. I've tried those techniques.
Yeah.
They don't really work, or they're not specific enough or something. I don't know what it is. They don't really work for me. But I realized there were a lot of techniques that had worked for me, that I had developed my own set of skills, and I sort of combined them with, I put them in the language used for, it's about frame control, where the idea is in a high stakes situation, one person has the frame and kind of controls the conversation. So if two spouses are arguing, probably one person, they're fighting to control the frame, and usually one person has it and the other person suddenly is, feels a little bit more down or is easily convinced or whatever. In a stand-up comedy, frame control is really important. Either you have the frame or the audience has the frame. Being on stage is high stakes. If you don't have the frame, the audience is like an X-ray machine. They know it, and they will just eviscerate you. So controlling the frame became really important in comedy, but also in entrepreneurship. I said, what parts of this actually, no BS. What are my stories where I'm using these techniques and they work, and I made money because of them, and I succeeded because of them. So I'll give you an example. I have one technique in there I call the advice technique, which I've never seen anybody write about this, but I knew it was like magic to me.
Yeah.
So let's say you're my boss and I'm asking you for a raise. People are very nervous when they're asking for a raise. And they don't know what to say. They get flustered. So I recommend something like the advice technique, which is go into your office and I say, hey, I've been working really hard this year. I'd love a raise, and the boss says, well, I don't know, where there's cutbacks this year, we're not really giving a lot of raises, and and then he says, well, okay, let's say you were to ask for a raise. How much do you want? How much more do you want? Okay, this is where the advice technique kicks in. You say, look, I'm really good at what I do. I'm working really hard. Here are the results. But I don't. You do this. As I've been working for you, really, we've gone to be more than just a boss. You've gone to be, my friend as well. And you're like the expert. You're like the grandmaster at negotiating raises. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. I know computer programming or accounting or whatever it is, but I don't know how to ask for a raise. I'm really not good at it. So just as a friend, let me ask you your advice. What should I? Well, I don't really know. What do people ask for? Like, well, how do people ask for a raise? What should I do here? And he's going to be happy that you're giving him status. So everything's about status. So you're giving him status by asking for his advice, and you're saying he's the expert at negotiating and asking for raises. You're also because you did this now. He wants to make sure he keeps his status. That's very important in the tribe to keep your alpha status. So he wants to give you good advice now, so he keeps that status. And once he tells you to do something, if you do it, he's not going to say no, because he just gave you the advice to do that.
Right.
And it sounds almost ridiculous, but this technique has made me so much money. It's ridiculous. Even selling a company for millions of dollars, because they always ask you, well, how much do you value your company? And I do the same thing. It's like, look, for the past 5 years, I've been head down building this company, getting customers, making money. I didn't want to sell the company. I don't know how to ask. I don't know how to value my company. I see some companies worth, billions that are like mine. So, that's anchoring. So you kind of just throw that out there. And so I don't even know what to ask for, but this is what you do all day is you buy companies. You're like the grandmaster of buying companies. So I wouldn't sell my company to you if I didn't like you and admire you. So let me just ask you advice. Like, forget that you're buying my company. What should I ask for? How would you value my company? And then what's reasonable? Like, what's a smart way for me to value my company? And surprisingly, they're not going to give you bad advice. They don't want you going to your friends and saying, he said I should ask for nothing. Like, he's going to do a good job giving you advice and giving you the realistic advice that he would offer.
Yeah. One of the frames that I haven't read that book, but one of the frames that I've come across recently is the doctor frame. I don't know if you've heard of that one.
No, tell me.
I absolutely
collect
love
these.
Okay, I love this frame, and I just learned it, and it blew my mind. As a health coach and a life coach. So one of the frames that you want to maintain if you're like coaching somebody is that you're the doctor. Okay, you're in control, and like with like a lot of coaches make mistakes in is like, you come to me and you're like, I want to be coached by you. Like, tell me what you do, and you're like, well, I do these things, but a lot of coaches have problems selling you their package or whatever. They feel like, I don't know if I could charge that. The problem, and so you can't think that way. Like, you have to remember, like, people are coming to you, if they go to the doctor's office, they don't go to the doctor to just like talk and have a conversation and be like, hey doc, like, how's it going? I'm like, what are you up to? What's new? Like, no, they go there because they have a problem. They want you to fix it. So
Right.
Keeping the doctor frame and like really remembering that, like, for the example they give is you cure cancer. Like, what you have to offer is you cure cancer. If you came into my doctor's office and you said, hey, Joel, I have cancer. I need your help. And I'm like, great. This is what we're going to do, James. We're going to put you on chemo and this. You're like, thank God. Like, whatever it takes. Like, I want the cure. And so a lot of, what I've seen is, including myself, a lot of coaches, they don't maintain this frame. And so they let the patient or whatever, the client, just kind of like, run their doctor's office. And when you come into a doctor's office, right, the doctor's in control. So I just find that fascinating.
You're really right. That's the doctor frame or the expert frame. If they don't take your advice, you got to just say, well, look, this is what I'm an expert in. Why? You have to be willing to have them walk away. But you say, look, this is what I'm an expert in. You came to me, so if you don't need this help, hey, we could have a little conversation, but, I'm busy.
Yeah.
And then they'll feel like, oh, no, had status with him for a while. I need to regain it. So then they stay with you.
Yes. Yeah.
And, but sometimes there's almost the opposite. Like, Ed Koch used to be mayor of New York, and he famously would ask people, "How am I doing?" And so sometimes you want to be more at their like a politician wants to be, at the level of the people too. So he tribe builds, which I talk a little about in the book too, which is, hey, we're all in the same tribe doing this together.
Right.
Let me know. And then if people feel involved in the process, that's another way to control the frame. They're in your tribe, you're the leader of the tribe suddenly. It's because you formed the tribe. So
Yeah.
all the people who say you're doing fine have now created a big tribe that you're the leader of when you say, "How am I doing?" So, so you have to figure out in each context what's the right frame to use.
Yeah. I love that. I want to be respectful of your time. I know you have to go in a little bit, so I just want to let everybody know that I had like a ton more questions. I mean, there's a chapter in your book called The 1% Rule, which I just love. Is just that idea of compounding and just getting 1% better every day. You've got another amazing chapter called The 50 to 1 Rule, which was just another big paradigm shift and kind of following the 80-20 rule. But I think a lot of us just get in our heads of like, oh, I got to start a business. I need to do X, Y, Z and do all these steps. And you're like, no, it's probably a lot simpler than that. Like, what is like the one thing that's probably giving you like the most output? Do that,
Yeah, like and also so that's the 80-20 rule where, if you plant 100 seeds, 20 of the seeds will be the ones that actually create the entire garden. Or it's more like 20% creates 20% of the seeds will create 80% of the garden. Or if you have 100 employees, 20% of the employees will create 80% of your profits. And then the idea is if you're using the 80-20 rule in everything, focus on the 20% of things that create 80% of the results. Because the thing is, people don't know the difference between 80% results and 100% results.
Right.
If you're like, we've seen this in business all the time. If your company is only 10 or 20% better than your competitor's company, the average person can't tell which is better. If Coke is 10% better than Pepsi, you can't tell by drinking it.
Yeah.
You don't really know what's better. And, if you're watching a tennis match between the number 1 person in the world and the number 100 person in the world, I can't tell which one really has more skills. Like, it's impossible. Now, they could see it very clearly. Like, the number 100 ranked person is like, oh my God, this guy is incredible. But the person on the street who doesn't know the billion or nuances of tennis can't tell the difference between number 1 and number 100. So you only really need to be successful. You really need to maximize your efficiency so you can get the output that's as good as the best in the world. People can't tell that you're not the best in the world, and then you use these other techniques like persuasion and understanding the field better and so on to monetize. Like a great example again is it doesn't matter if you play chess or not. These are just good examples. But being a nationally ranked master at chess since I was a kid has helped me in life so much. Like, I was a horrible student, but I got into a good college. I got into a great graduate school because guess what? They were working on the computer that eventually became Deep Blue, and they needed a chess player to test it out. And so I got into graduate school without good grades. I got into one of the top 3 in the country. And getting a job, I got a job that I was initially not prepared for because everybody just thinks chess players are smart, which is not true.
Yeah.
They're smart at chess, but nothing else. But because I was a chess master and the person hiring me was a much lower ranked chess player, I was instantly hired. I've sold companies because people think, oh, this guy must be really smart. He could be like a military general if he's a chess master. So it's really helped me in life. And
I got to go out and be a chess master. I just realized.
Well, a couple weeks ago, I was in a cab and we were just talking, the driver and I said, where are you from? What did you do there? And he said he was from Turkey and he said he played chess. And I'm like, oh, I play chess. And I figured he was like everybody else. He just liked the game and, he probably was okay, but not really that good. And he says, yeah, I was Turkey national champion. And I'm like, oh. And I'm like, what's your rating? And he's like, well, I was ranked an international master. So just so you know, like for someone like me, who is a national master, to be an international master would require years of work and study to the neglect of everything else. And so that's what this guy must have done. He's probably studied an extra 4 years more than I studied. And and yet, what was the benefit for him? Nobody knows the difference between a nationally ranked master and an internationally ranked master.
Right.
Most people just heard those terms for the first time right now. So nobody knows the difference. And anybody who was looking at our games would not be able to tell who the better player is, even though he would beat me at least 2 out of 3 times if we were to play a match. And but it doesn't matter. I accrued from much less work. I accrued many more benefits than he did from the
Right.
activity. And so the 80-20 rule is sort of about that. But then what people never talk about is you could apply the 80-20 rule to itself. So there's like the 4-64 rule. And then you can apply the 80-20 rule to that, which is 1% of your effort should create 50% of the value, which is the 80-20 rule cubed. And
Yes.
it works.
It works.
Like,
Yeah.
in comedy, you could spend 20 years learning how to be as good as Jerry Seinfeld, or you could study what really is making people laugh at your shows, and you realize the main time they laugh is when you do impressions. And so you could immediately just start focusing on getting really good at impressions and adding humor in, and you did 1% of the work of a Jerry Seinfeld, but people are laughing just as much
Yeah.
because you found the 1%.
I love that. It's such a key point in the book, man.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I'm really proud of this book because it's really the first book I wrote that is super super all my books are very story driven because I think that's important also.
Yep.
And but it's I really wanted to be super practical because people need that now. They've lost their jobs. They're switching passions. There's careers are longer than ever. There's no lifetime one job or one career. And yes, you're right. I sometimes feel like I've been a dilettante. I've done too many things. But you are who you are. Like I can't help the fact that sometimes I just get interested in other things and I get excited about other things. So it is what it is.
Yeah. Well, and you know what? I mean, at the end of the day, we thank you for it because then you get things like this. You get this book, and it's beautiful. So thank you.
Thanks so much. And Joel, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. This is great. You're a good interviewer, and which is, by the way, also is a hard skill collection of micro skills. Like it takes a while to be a good interviewer.
Yeah, it does. Do you have a little bit of time just for a couple of lightning round questions, and then we'll wrap it up?
Let's do it.
Awesome, man. If the old you could see the new you, what would the new you say?
What would the old me say, or what would the new me say?
Yeah, what would the new you say to the old you?
Uh, I would say get before I would say manage your risks in everything you do. Before you do something that seems like it has great rewards, just ask someone for help. Just ask someone to tell you, don't invest all your money in one private investment, for instance, or don't buy a house you can't afford. Like you just need someone you trust who can tell you good advice. You need that plus minus equal.
Yeah.
I would basically tell them the techniques in this book. I said also
book, yeah.
learn about. I'm going to tell you one persuasion technique, the advice technique. Use this
Yeah.
and think about things in terms of micro skills and experiments. And I would basically tell honestly the advice in this book, and then a little bit of the advice in Choose Yourself, which is don't let anyone tell you can't do something. You can do it. It might not look the way you thought it would look, but you can do this. A friend of mine was trading bonds at J.P. Morgan, but he was always obsessed with sports. But he's in his 40s. He's not going to be an athlete now, and but he was trading bonds. And then the pandemic started, so he had a lot of free time at home, and he decided to start a newsletter about combining his interests. He would write stories about sports, but there are many people doing newsletters about that. So he would always had a finance component. He would tell these really interesting, fascinating financial stories about sports, like for example, in the Super Bowl, in the halftime, this singer named The Weeknd performed. Well, I didn't know this, but the singers during Super Bowl halftime aren't paid, and he used $7 million of his own money. The Weeknd did to to produce the show. And so I didn't know this. And so this guy, Joe Pompliano,
Yeah, he
he
was just
wrote
on your
about how
podcast. He was just on
yeah,
your
yeah, I
podcast.
just did a
That was a
podcast
great
with him
episode.
because I
Yeah.
was so fascinated by this. He broke down all the economics of how these artists have benefited from prior Super Bowl halftime. And I didn't know any of that. It was really fascinating. And every day there's a new story like that. So he writes this newsletter. It's got 27,000 subscribers. He's making just as good a living as he was making as J.P. Morgan. And so he quit his job, and now for the rest of his life he gets to do something he loves. He's loved doing this, and he loves it now, and that's why he's the best in the world at combining sports and finance and making a living at it. And he did it really fast because that's the benefit of these skip the line type of skills. He hadn't read my book, obviously, but he, knew instinctively, I'm going to combine these skills and create something unique, this talent sex.
Yes.
So, it's just, that's another thing I would tell myself, or this is something I tell my kids now.
Yeah. Man, that was great. What I think I might have an answer. I think I might know the answer because you've said almost a lot of kind of what you just said. I think will answer the question. But just curious, what are some choices you made that you think made you who you are today?
Well, certainly, this is really important. I talk about this a little in the book, but this is really important. There's this cliche, you're the average of the 5 people you spend time with. And it turns out to be extremely true. If you spend time with a bunch of people who aren't very nice, who aren't very kind of growth mindset oriented, if they're all pessimistic or cynical, then you're gonna have a hard time succeeding in life. I'm not saying drop your friends, drop your family, but make sure you spend time with people who really, inspire you and lift you up and challenge you and have this. They don't have to be all mentors, but they're people who want to succeed at the things you want to succeed at, or they have a good mindset for success, even if they don't do what you do. It's really important to spend time with good people. Sometimes you could think, I better work for this guy for a while, even though he's a total jerk, because he'll help me make a lot of money. And I've thought this way in the past a lot. And it never really works out. I mean, maybe there's anecdotes where it works out, but it's very rare for that to work out. Most of the time, you end up being fired or quitting and just regretting the whole thing. And since I realized that, I've only surrounded myself with really good quality people. And anytime someone doesn't act appropriately with me, it's almost like I have a 1-strike rule and you're out. And maybe that's too harsh, but life is short, and I want to do well at the things I love doing. I don't want people to bring me down. Now, if someone needs my help, that's one thing. But if someone's just a horrible person, but I think they're going to help me make a lot of money, that's not good enough reason. It's not going to work.
I love that.
So I think that choice was a big deal for me. And then the ancillary to that is I've then chosen good people to be around me, whether it's your friends, your spouse, your partners, your whatever. I'll give you one example also.
Yes.
So Mike Massimino is an astronaut. He went into space and fixed the Hubble telescope. That was one of his big missions. And the first 4 or 5 times he applied for NASA, they rejected him for various reasons. His eyesight wasn't good, or he didn't pass some test, or whatever. So he figured, okay, I'm not gonna make it. So he applied to be a PhD in astrophysics at MIT. He did his PhD thesis on making a robot that could work on Mars. And in retrospect now, he looks back at one of his classes and he says, 9 out of the 11 people in that class all became astronauts eventually. And I was thinking to myself, if all he did was get upset at himself and depressed because he didn't get into NASA and he started drinking and hanging out at a bar, there is no bar in the world where you would be able to say, 9 of the 11 people sitting around this bar are going to be astronauts. Like, that will never happen.
Yeah.
So that is an example where it really worked. And those people all lifted each other up. That becomes your scene. You have to have a scene. And those people lifted each other up, and the scene goes where it goes. They went into space. The scene in a bar will go where it goes.
Yeah, that's huge. I love that. On that note, is there anybody, you've had such an eclectic background, a lot of mentors and a lot of people that have shaped your life. Is there anybody that you follow or that inspires you, like currently today?
I mean, a ton of people, a lot of people, and you don't have to have an actual mentor. You can have a virtual mentor. So you could have people from history that you want to mimic, you know, what they do, or people I don't know. You want to study them and study their habits, and maybe it's great if you could watch them on video because you see even how they move and how they move confidently when they do what they're an expert at, and you have these mirror neurons in your brain that your brain wants to mimic people who are high up, ranked high in the tribe,
Yeah.
and so you'll naturally start to gain at least some of their skills by even observing virtual mentors. So there's just a lot of people that I admire currently.
Very cool. Any top books that you'd recommend? I read a lot of books that have shaped my life. Is there like any top 1 to 3 or that come to your mind?
Yeah, I mean, but everybody's different. But like, I think Robert Greene is a great author. He wrote a book, Mastery, that's really great. Matt Ridley is one of the smartest people on the planet. His latest book is called The Innovation of Everything. He also wrote a great book called The Rational Optimist, and he wrote another book, The Evolution of Everything. His books are always valuable. But then, I read a lot of literary fiction because it helps me. Those mirror neurons kick in, and it helps me be a better writer. So if you like writing, I have a huge list of books that I like. If you like public speaking, I would recommend watching comedians because they're the best public
Yeah.
speakers on the planet because they public speak and they're funny. And, it just depends what you're interested in. But the good thing is when you read a book, some people aren't readers, but when you read a book, it's like being a vampire because not only do you have your own life experiences, but you absorb some percentage of the entire life experiences of the author of the book. So it's like you're
Yeah.
sucking in their life into your brain. And the more books you read, the better off you'll be.
Totally. Um, it just reminded me of this concept of like oneness. There's this doctor I follow, and he talks about this idea of oneness. Like we're all connected, and like you just said, it's like use that experience. You don't have the experience. Use James's experience. It's just that's amazing.
Yeah, and it's really fascinating about that because think about phones. So the iPhone, you would say, is really, really different from, other phones, particularly when it came out. And you would think phones aren't the same. There's the iPhone and there's the Nokia phone. They're not the same. And yet the architecture of both phones is 99.9% the same. They're phones. They have to communicate on the same standards. They have to connect in the same way to cellular networks and roam and this and that. They're totally phones. And then the iPhone had a few extra features compared to other phones when it first came out. So we're like that. If you look at us and we're really different, but 99.99% we're the same. We're always relatable to everybody else.
Yeah. Any a couple more questions, then we'll wrap it up. Any rituals or hacks or like practices that you do on a daily basis?
Write 10 ideas a day.
Yeah, I knew that one.
Exercise that idea muscle.
Love it. And then finish this sentence because 2020 was such a crazy year, right? People are like, it was stressful, no doubt about it, right? The pandemic and everything. I want you to answer this though. Let's reframe it. 2020 was the greatest gift because why?
I was super productive. I was able to focus on finishing 2 books. I did a ton more podcasts because I had more time because I wasn't traveling anywhere. So I
Yeah.
just had more time to do things. And also, I just relaxed. I watched TV every night, and I love television. And because I was normally performing comedy 5 nights a week, and I wasn't able to watch TV so much. I just love watching TV. And, and then I was able to fall back in love with chess, which I hadn't studied in 23 years.
Awesome, man. Well, great having you. And last but not least, where can people find you?
Uh, Anywhere. James Altucher, just Google me. I'm all over the place. And, if people have questions for me on Skip the Line, I have a Facebook group called the Choose Yourself Facebook group, and you could join that. And I'm happy to answer any questions and hang out there and run for president in 2024. Just go to fec.gov and everybody should file to run for president.
That's right. We'll be looking for you then.
Yeah. So,
All right, James.
thanks again, Joel. This was really great, and thank you for having me on. Everybody goes on lots of podcasts to promote their book. I haven't done that, so I really appreciate this, and, let me know whatever you need, if anything, and thanks again.
Likewise, brother. Thank you.